Welcome back. Today I want to talk about a very, very special album, something completely different from any other album I've ever featured or piece of music that I've featured on this Great Recordings YouTube playlist. Now, the last two topics I covered, you may remember, were Beyonce's Cowboy Carter and then Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. And after those two gigantic pieces of music, gigantic meaning that Cowboy Carter is a very long double album, I think it's about an hour and a half long, something like that, maybe even more. And then Beethoven's Seventh Symphony is a piece that you really have to study and listen to closely to really grasp. And each time you hear it, you hear something new in it. No matter how many times, there'll be a new vision, new idea coming into your head. And indeed, Cowboy Carter from Beyonce is similar in the sense that there's so much going on in so many different tracks, and you can try and break it down lyrically, you can try and break it down musically. Oh, where did that influence come from? Where did this influence come from? Well, none of these things apply to my choice today. And I wanted to choose it because it's so different, and because it makes us think about listening to music in a very different way. In the same way as that today outside of this studio, it's a nice sunny day and there's a few white puffy clouds in the sky. Now, 99% of the human beings walking around my hometown here in Belgium will not notice the clouds because there's buildings in the way. And if they notice it, oh yeah, it's sunny and cloudy. But of course, music is like visual art. You need to contribute something to it in order to fully appreciate it. My mother always said, my mother was a fine arts painter and sculptor. She always said that, Harley, you have to look at the painting. You have to engage at the painting. You need to look at it for half an hour or more sometimes and look at the brush strokes, look at the colors. Ask yourself, what could it mean? Where is it going? What was the artist feeling? It's an interactive process, and I believe it's exactly the same with music, except for this album. And I will get back to it very soonly. And what is soon? But what is this album? Of course, I'm going to just tell you now. Of course, you've seen it in the title, no doubt. It's Ambient 1, Music for Airports by Brian Eno. Now, before we get to the album and before I start playing the excerpts from it, maybe just a little bit about Eno, Brian Eno, as he's referred to here, because earlier in his career it was just Eno. He was born Peter George St. John le Baptiste de la Salle Eno. Now that's a hell of a name, I must admit. He was born on the 15th of May in 1948 in a place called Woodbridge in Suffolk. Now, I've been there, I know Woodbridge. And he did say that Suffolk, growing up in Suffolk, influenced his art later on, in the sense that there were broad landscapes with very few points of identity, of location, maybe a little church spire in the distance, but this idea of flat open space and vastness, if you like, as a young child growing up, gave him his emotional, intellectual context, shall we say. Now, his parents, William Eno, was a postal worker and he played in a local dance band. So that's obviously where he got some of that musical influence from. Sadly, about his mother, as often is the case, we know very little about Maria Eno. All that I could glean is that she was a devout Catholic and that Brian was brought up in a very strict Catholic family, went to a Catholic school. And then after he left school, he went to Ipswich Art College. And there, obviously, he was working in the fine arts. But he met a professor there, and somehow he influenced him into experimenting with music, different types of music and music to accompany art. And obviously, Eno was extremely open to this and a very inquisitive and open mind and creative person. Now, he never studied classical music. He never went to music college. And so his whole career was spent trying to sometimes work and think like a classical composer would, but without the writing skills, because he hadn't learned it. Now, on the back of the album, he's got these patterns here, and this is the pattern that he's drawn out to help the musicians or engineers to understand what it is he's doing. But I'm running ahead of myself just a little bit, because now some of you may not even know Brian Eno or have any clue who he is or was. He's still alive today. But the sorts of people he's worked with, and I've made a list here because there are just so many. David Bowie with the Berlin Trilogy, Roxy Music, U2, co-produced with Daniel Lanois, Joshua Tree, Achtung Baby, and other albums from them. Talking Heads, absolutely worked a lot with David Byrne and Talking Heads. Coldplay, Viva la Vida, for example, he produced that. Paul Simon, Grace Jones, Robert Fripp, Massive Attack, and in the classical world, Philip Glass, Gavin Bryars and Michael Nyman, to name but a few. So this guy has worked with a hell of a lot of musicians. Now, the album itself was recorded in 1978 and first released locally in 78. In the Island Studios in London. Now, why do I mention this? Why is it so important? Well, because the engineers working with Brian Eno had a big role to play, because he had lots of ideas, and together with them he had to create what was in his head. It is said that he got the idea for this album, Ambient 1, from waiting in Cologne Airport, Cologne Bonn Airport. And in those days, anybody who was brought up in the 60s, 1960s, will know that muzak was everywhere. Muzak is music, often popular tunes of the day, rewritten, taking all the emotion and the passion and the dynamics out. And this music was played in supermarkets, in lifts, hotel lobbies, everywhere. It was dreadful. And apparently Brian Eno was sitting in Cologne Bonn Airport. Probably he had just met his friend and been working with his friend Connie Plank, because his studio wasn't far from there. Anyway, he was sitting there and it was driving him nuts whilst waiting for his plane. And he said, there must be better music for this situation. And he went away, thought about it, and then came up with the concept of ambient music. And in fact, it was him who coined the term ambient music. And it's sort of no accident that this album is called Ambient 1, Music for Airports. So that's really the beginning of the album. Now, what do I need to say about it? I think it's important before we talk about some of the musicians and collaborators there, because there aren't that many, to be honest. It's really a work of his. The idea, the concept was that you could listen to it in any circumstance. It could just fill a void, to be an ambience to the sounds that are happening. Now, in a busy airport terminal, you've got people running in and out, you've got the sounds of aircraft taking off in the background, you've got all sorts of noise of those carts with the luggage on and people talking in the distance. So, and the announcements of tannoys. So he had this idea of filling that space. But he also said there's kind of no rule to listening to this. And I've actually sat down on a number of occasions and just sat with my eyes closed in the listening room and listened to the whole of one side. Now, I think the LP is interesting because it was made for LP and there are two sides. And of course, again, after the length of an LP, which in this case is about, 25 minutes, something like that, you have to get up and turn the thing over. Otherwise, you get this sound of the record going round at the end. And that in itself is a deciding factor of what you're going to do next and how you listen to it. And I often say that it's good to hear, like I did with Cowboy Carter, listen to it on LP, because every 22 minutes you're getting up, having a little break, thinking about the next thing, and then either continuing by turning it over or making a cup of tea or whatever. But this album, had CDs been around at that time and digital recording, I think Brian Eno would have just kept them on loops, meaning that you can play them for an indefinite period of time. So of all the albums, this is the one I'm saying probably works better on streaming and on CD. It's fun to have as an LP because it's such an important LP to have in a collection. But it is, it could easily just be played in a loop. And I will play you some examples in a minute to illustrate that. Now, what do I need to say about it? So I sat and listened to it right through, focusing and concentrating, and it becomes a kind of meditation. In nearly all music, you hear a progression, you hear a change, you hear something, and it takes you on a journey. You start at one place and you end up somewhere else. With this, you don't. And yet, if you're just listening to it and letting it wash over you like the sound of waves on the seashore, you might think that there's a progression. But I think the progression is in your head. I think it's this level of relaxation and calmness that can come over you. Now, I'm not a big one for meditation and that kind of thing, but I do understand that this is the effect that it has when you sit and listen. It can be extremely calming after a long day. Having said that, it's absolutely fine. Just last night, in preparation for this lecture, I was doing all the washing up and cleaning the kitchen and wiping all the surfaces down. And I had this on in the background. In fact, I was playing 1-2 and 2-2, which means this is side 2, track 1 and track 2. I was just streaming it through the kitchen. And I found it very calming, and it allowed me to go into a lot more detail with just polishing the little edges and on a cup or a pot or something, and noticing a little mark, because there was no real concept of time. And that is fascinating, because you don't get that, I think, with any other kind of music. And although you can't say that, or it would be wrong to say that Brian Eno was the first to produce this kind of music, he was certainly the first to come up with the term ambient music and put his stamp on it. So let's begin a little bit, shall we, with the Island Studios, with Rhett Davies and the producers that he had, his fellow collaborators. Now, on track 1, I think it's very important to understand that he's working with Robert Wyatt here. Robert Wyatt is someone I've admired for a very long time. You may know him for the person who first sang Shipbuilding by Elvis Costello. It's absolutely fantastic. I'll put a link in to it. It's a great song if you don't know it already. Robert Wyatt was very busy in lots of different experimental music. He was a founding member of the band Soft Machine. Maybe that means something to some people. Again, very, very interesting music. Had a tragic accident before he did this album. I think the accident was in 73. This album is 78. Really a fantastic force in the music world, and a lot of influence, and he's actually playing the piano here. So let's start, shall we, with 1-2 track. We're going to start with 1-1, of course. Track 1, side 1. Let's have a little listen to this. what you'll notice is there's no real time signature here. It's free flowing. And this sound washes over you. For copyright reasons, I'm not going to play too much and for too long. But what is interesting, if I move along further into the track, now we're halfway through the track, you come immediately where you're in. You have, I'll go again a bit further. Oh, there's a different sound here. So no matter where we are, I'm now right near the beginning again. And this what, for me, makes it absolutely brilliant, because it's a piece of music with a dedicated length, but it's not like when you listen to a Mozart symphony or a song that you know well or an album you know well, and you go out of the room and you answer the phone or whatever it is, or you talk to the postman and you come back in, you know exactly where you are. Oh, we've moved further into the piece. This is where the drum solo begins, or this is where... Here, you have no idea where you are. You walk back in, it could be just still at the beginning, it could be in the middle, it could be at the end, especially if you put it on a loop, which is something we can do now, obviously very easily with our devices. Now, let's have a little look at number 2. So this is the second track on side 1. Very different. Now, what he's doing here is he's using loops of voices from the singers, and he's made these tape loops. I think there was about 20 of them in total. He made all these loops, and apparently they were even going around the studio chairs. So you record a piece of music onto a piece of tape. You glue that piece of tape together on a reel-to-reel machine like this, and so it goes around literally in a loop, and he had all these different loops playing at random times and intervals to create this Isn't this fabulous? It's very soothing, very powerful, all at the same time. Now, again, if I just pick this up and move it along and then bring it up, again, it makes no difference. But when you're listening to it, you can get so sucked in that you swear that there's a form. And that's it's like looking at the clouds in the sky. You see forms in those clouds. Other people just glance, see a white puffy thing, but you might see a form, you might have a memory come back to you, something your father said, something one of your children said. You know, all sort of ideas come back and fill the space. And if you listen to this music uninterrupted, I'm sure you'll have a very interesting effect. Now, let's move on to the first track on side 2. I think it's very interesting. Listen to it opens with the piano. And again, I can move this through anywhere I like at random. And the interesting thing for me was, last night when I was listening to it again, I thought, you know, that reminds me of something. What is it? And you'll find this in all music. Something reminds you of something else, and you always think of that. In classical music especially, you'll hear something, oh, I've heard that before, where? So I had to stop the music and I had to sit back and listen and think, and I thought, yes, I know exactly where it comes from. And so once I got it, it was like a eureka moment. And you have to ask yourself, maybe the person who plays this track remembers it even without realizing. Do you recognize that? It's Within from Daft Punk's album Random Access Memories, of course. But you see that I don't suppose that the pianist there deliberately took it. Maybe he did. Maybe it's credited somewhere. I don't think so, though. I think it's just subliminal. Could be a complete coincidence, but it could be that he heard Ambient 1, Music for Airports, and actually developed that. And without even realizing it, it's just come back to him one day sitting at the piano to get an idea. Okay, let's move on now to the last track, 2-2. Now this has quite a different sound to it. It's on the synthesizer, and it's Brian Eno working with Connie Plank in his studio in Cologne. And one of the vocalists we heard earlier was Krista Fast, and she was the life partner of Connie Plank. And Connie Plank's a really interesting guy because he's worked with all sorts of bands and artists as well, and was really the founder of what we knew in Europe as being krautrock. I think he was certainly very much involved with Kraftwerk from the very beginning. So a very influential person. And I think we can hear his influence in this track. And again, one push of the finger, anywhere I like, back. It's quite fun actually, just moving it wherever you like. And I'm sure Brian Eno wouldn't object. Beethoven would if we did that with his work. I'm just moving it at random points and it keeps playing. I think it's fascinating. I think it's a groundbreaking album. I think it deserves everyone's listen at least once or twice. I do recommend sitting down and listening to it, even if it's just one track at a time. And there is quite a long pause at the end of some of the tracks so that it doesn't rush straight into the next one. And I think least of all, it's going to be very, very calming, just like sitting on the side of the beach, you know, on the gravel, on a pebble beach with the sound of the waves rolling in. You can sit there for hours without speaking a word, alone or with a group of people. And I think we can do this in our apartment blocks and flats or houses in cities, or sitting in a field, on a train journey, on a long plane journey. I think this music is fantastic, and it's set a whole new genre of music called ambient music. And if you look under ambient music in Wikipedia and search in genres in your streaming service, you'll find all sorts of weird and wonderful albums in the ambient world. Well, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this little talk of Brian Eno's Ambient One Music for Airports. If you have been, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy the music.